This video is sponsored by Rebel Technology. Hello again. Today I'd like to show you the strange sequencing power of the Rebel Technology Stoicheia and Tonic. So the Stoicheia is a dual Euclidean pattern generator. It makes two sets of Euclidean patterns, more on those in a sec, and the Tonic is a pitch sequencer that uses gates as its input methodology. No, really, gates. More on that in a sec. And what I find particularly interesting about these two kind of combos of modules is using them together, the way that they work as a little team, so that these two individual parts kind of add up into a whole sequencer, like a backbone for something else. And the principles of how they're doing it are actually really similar to the things that I've been exploring in my live case, especially Tonic. And it's this idea that you might find it inspiring and interesting to consider smaller parts that you build a larger sequencing whole out of, a bigger, complex sequencer made out of separate bits, rather than just buying one be-all and end-all module that just kind of does everything and hands it to you on a plate. Because this little combo really doesn't work like a normal sequencer in the traditional sense. It's something unique and something kind of odd, but it will lend itself to live improvisational music where you need to have a minimum of inputs and a maximal amount of changes. Anyway, first we'll just mess around with them individually to understand what they would do as building blocks, and then let's combine them and see what they do in sweet, holy combination. Part 1. What be Stoicheia? Okay, so the Stoicheia first is a dual Euclidean sequencer. It algorithmically generates two completely different sets of Euclidean rhythms based on an input clock signal. Alright, steady on, flower. What are Euclidean rhythms? Okay, fair enough. About 2,318 years ago, extreme geometry enthusiast and all-round top thinker Euclid, backed up by a respectably strong hat and beard game, published perhaps one of the most significant textbooks ever written. His book of Elements. And being a favourite of Galileo, Kepler, Copernicus and Sir Isaac Newton, what have they ever done for us? It'd be fair to say that the impact of Elements was significant in mathematics, especially geometry. But it was only until the 21st century that a new use was devised, to wit, the Euclidean algorithm generates traditional musical rhythms. So, specifically, a radically named dude called Godfrey Toussaint, who also had a very strong hair game, published a paper in 2004 explaining how one of Euclid's concepts, and this was namely an algorithm he generated for computing the greatest common divisor between two given integers, or, as Toussaint puts it, a way of distributing patterns as evenly as possible, that turned two numbers into a resulting pattern that mirrored traditional music rhythms. So, for example, as described by Toussaint, by Euclidean algorithming the number 5 into the number 8 results in the hand clapping pattern from Elvis Presley's Hound Dog. I believe it was Boards of Canada who said, "Music is math." Enough history. This is how algorithms make algorithms. So the whole thing here is this is a dual module. It has an alpha and a beta side, and both are exactly the same. But we can combine the alpha and betas in a cool way, but they are able to operate completely independently. And so this middle knob, this controls the sequence length. And then the bottom knob controls how many steps there are within that sequence, or what's referred to in kind of Euclidean speak as the amount of fills. So sequence length, the amount of notes within that sequence. And these two dials give us our kind of different patterns. They're how we decide the length, and then it tries to evenly distribute the patterns throughout them, but doesn't evenly distribute them. It makes interesting patterns. And then this top knob controls rotation of the sequence. So once you've used the bottom two knobs to make a pattern, like determine how long it is, determine what the fill is, and you'll get different patterns with different fill amounts and different lengths, this rotates the pattern. So maintaining all of the amount, it shifts the pattern forward and back. And the cool thing here is that obviously with two different independent things which could have different lengths, different lengths means Reishi phasing business, where you can have one sequence a little bit shorter, the other a bit longer, and then they play off of each other in an interesting way. We can have sequences up to 16 steps in length, by the way, anything from 1 to 16. And by flicking the switch, we can activate a mode where instead of having 2 independent sequences, we have one 32-step sequence, or up to, which is a combination of A, then B, alpha, then beta, cycling, with the same pattern coming out of both outputs. Enough talk, let's play. So, I'm going to use the Kronos, which is a clock source, by the way. Kronos, not Expono Gorg Sigma. The Kronos is just like a tap tempo LFO generator. You can literally tap these little buttons and get LFOs and clocks and stuff. You can actually also externally clock this and you get divisions, which is really sweet. So it's like a syncable time dividing and multiplying LFO. And it can be used as a one-shot as well for creating one-shot envelopes. So really useful module. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to feed that into the clock input and it gets copied over to the other side. We can independently clock the meter if we wish. And then I'm going to feed it to something. I'm going to feed it into a kick. And I'm going to use the Mutant BD9 from friends at Hex Inverter. That is an excellent, hard, sort of 909-ish kind of kick. And we get that. Check that out, mate. So we're feeding a clock in. And with everything kind of zeroed, you're getting pretty much a straight 4/4 beat. And if I turn the amount of fills, you get more people called fill. And I'll move that back. Returns to 4/4. And maybe I'll change the length. And then I will increase fill. Maybe sparse. So just by jamming these two controls, I'm creating different patterns, and this will be more obvious if we have another element. So let us, do you see where I did that element? I'm going to trigger the Mutant Snare, which is also from Hex Inverter. So, both sides of Stochea are being fed the same clock, but they do different things with that clock depending on the settings. And so it's just making a little rhythm based on these two input values per channel. And do you remember I said that there was a rotate at the top? It's more obvious when you've got the two working together. Yeah. So by reducing fills, we can make it more sort of infrequent. You get less notes. You get different patterns as well. But there's another kind of mode here. You see these two switches. So these two little switches control the kind of triggering mode that each channel alpha and beta has. And the top one is called trigger mode, which is to say that it works kind of like a traditional, whatever that means, Euclidean algorithmic sequencer, where it will basically be filling out the pattern according to Euclid's ancient Greek algorithm. But if we put it in the bottom mode, what it will do is it will remain high from onbeat to onbeat. And what that means effectively is that you just get more infrequent patterns, basically. So if I bring this back up, and we've got quite a busy snare pattern, if I flip it down, we have longer gates coming out of the module, but in the case of triggering things like drum modules, it just means less frequent. And you can also, in the center position, use these as mutes. So you can start to jam the idea of having more or less frequent percussion, or none at all. What you can hear is the mutant snare going through the Soma Lyra 8 effects, by the way, which is giving it a room sound. It's like mad, insane delay unit. It's a really freaky way to program drums. By just turning dials, it changes my pattern for me. It changes the length, the fills, and by changing the length and or the fill, or both, you get a different pattern, and then you can rotate the pattern. So you see here's a good example of a phasing pattern. Drum and bass, mate. Yeah. Okay. This is using the Audio Damage Neuron as a kind of hat. Just taking the Kronos' clock. Who needs more than that? Then for good measure, let's take the other side of Kronos, and I'm going to use it to control the decay amount. Wow. Yeah, that's ace. Flipping it up and back down. There's a little fill. Another type of fill. And then as mentioned, if you flip this down, you get the alternating mode. I could do that all day. So funny, isn't it? This idea that you're not going, hey, I want to beat on 3, 5, and 7. You turn dials, and by turning dials, a 2,000-year-old Greek algorithm determines what actual rhythm you get. Sequencing drums using gates is just the obvious use of gates. That's certainly the first thing that comes to my mind. If only there was something that wasn't drums that I could trigger with gates and was really unique and interesting. Part 2. Delicious Tonic. Tonic is very simple, but very odd. It's an additive pitch sequencer that turns gates into melodies. It works like this. If I feed the gate output of Tonic to my voice and the CV output also to my voice, we get this. By playing these little preview keys, what happens is that every time Tonic receives a gate into one of these inputs, it plays a certain interval, and it's an additive and subtractive process. The way that it works is that this little button here means -1 semitone from the bass note, +2, +4, +8, +16, and then this top one, a variable one that can go from 1 octave up to half an octave down. And what's cool is that you don't just have to press one at once, you can press more than one at once. So by combining these intervals, you can actually get up to 32 different semitones happening with just the kind of 5 buttons, lower buttons in combination. And then once you add the kind of variable top one, you can get even more. And obviously the whole idea here is if you feed it gates, then we're going to play those intervals and combine them in different ways in real time, not just going to play it with your hands like this preview mode. And also, just to say, it is equally tempered at the moment, that's how it ships. But round the back of Tonic are little trimmers, there's little trim pots. And so by adjusting the trimmers around the back, adventurous Richard D. Jamers can experiment with other tuning standards as well. You can basically tune it to whatever mad standard you fancy. And again, just to say, whenever I'm pushing the button, it's both outputting the pitch and it's also outputting the gate. That's how it's triggering my voice. And by the way, the voice is made up of a bunch of different things. It's 2 IntelliJar Dixie 2s, Noise Engineering Basimila Ceteritas Alta, being mixed by the ADE60 from Abstract Data, and then the envelope is coming from the Stochastic Function Generator from ADAC. More on that in a future video. But the point with those buttons is whenever you trigger a pitch change, whenever you feed it a gate, then it will output a gate from here. So you can kind of just feed all your gates in willy-nilly and you'll get just the one combined gate out. It's really handy. So you feed it lots of things and you just get your one coherent gate out. So I guess it's designed so that you would be able to use this as in place of a traditional pitch sequencer, and you would be using whatever gate pattern generators you had handy. If only we had a gate pattern generator handy. So I guess then what we should do is let's feed it some Euclidean rhythms. Euclidean rhythm 1. Hear all this kind of fuzzy delay coming from the Soma Lyra. And if we go to alternating mode, we'll get long notes mixed with our other notes. Now we have Tonic doing some kind of weird like techno thing with rings. And then what I'm using is another trigger source, marbles. So I've just got a longer sequence. The more gates you feed it, the longer the sequence. More interesting the combinations. And then I'm using the Stochea to both trigger Tonic and also the mutant snare. Nice to have some clock dividers and some logic modules as well to extend these even further and get extra patterns that we could feed into Tonic. Weird. And then just to be weird as heck, let's not just use rings as internal resonator, but feed it a Basimila Ceteritas Alta as a excitation source. This slightly more complex kind of semi-ambient weird thing takes advantage of a sequential switch, a Dupfer one, which is an excellent pairing for tonic, because with a sequential switch you can send sequences of patterns into the gates and really pick which gates you want to trigger and kind of in what order. It gives you a lot more control and a really repeatable pattern, if that's what you want. Here. Piano is coming from the Expert Sleepers General CV, yeah mate. Soma effects, Soma Lyra 8, Eventide EuroDDL for the wavery tape delay. That's using a audio rate modulation, creates quivering tape. And then see how the sequential switch goes round and round, and I'm feeding it rhythms from the Stochea, and it's choosing where they're going into tonic. It's like an injector for tonic. And then this is the same pitch information from tonic, very much like my live system, being fed to another oscillator, in this case the Psylonics IntelliGel Cycle Box, also being fed through its own Eventide EuroDDL luxury. Cycle Box is amazing. Baby shapeshifter. Speeding it up. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Nice. It's like Steve Reich's fevered dream. But I like it. Nice. And in this one, we're using the sequential switch from Duck for Never Heard of Them to feed the tonic so that we get a nice repeatable pattern. And I'm using circadian rhythms as a way of sending very regular clocks into the sequential switch so I can get repeated 16th notey type things. I'm also sending that into the Chronos and using the Chronos as a tempo synced LFO, which is feeding the VSL, Vintage Synth Lab VCF74 filter here. And it's making us a nice little sort of, we've got a nice pattern where it's sending 16ths in and we're changing every beat. So the tonic is moving through a nice repeating pattern. And to that I add stochea. Doing some Euclidean business. And that deserves a kick. Whoa. Delay from Eventide, EuroDDL. And the second voice, being fed from the tonic again, is rings. Rings is source, is the Dixies that feed the oscillator. Huh. Yeah. Ace.